This is VikesNow, Dustin Baker, a new week, Monday, May 23rd, and over the weekend, I think starting back to Friday, there was, Shannon Sharp tweeted, name 10 quarterbacks you'd rather have than Cousins, Kirk Cousins, Vikings quarterback, and that was a bonanza on Twitter. Then there was some debate about Drew Brees and Cousins and how they're statistically similar. And then today I dragged myself into one. Some gentleman wanted to know why. What's the case for Cousins as a top 12 quarterback? And I am a decent guy to ask for that because I go by the numbers, and that's why I feel really cool over here. I put Cousins' rankings on screen, first of its kind for this show. Remember, we don't have a video producer. It's just me in the kitchen. So I want to go through this. I did not bring you on this show to just look at these rankings here and call it a day. These are for context, so I'm going to go through them, and we'll arrive at probably a range or a ranking for Cousins. So let's get this out of the way. This is how I do things. I use evidence based on numbers that are presented before me or that I go find. So if you take, these are Cousins in 2021, his year-end rankings, 4th in passer rating, 5th in PFF, 8th in DVOA, 14th in the EPA, CPOE, and 15th in QBR. A lesson to the wise QBR is never friendly to Cousins. It never has been, never will be. It doesn't suit his game or vice versa, so get used to that one. If you take all of these metrics and you average them, it is 9.2. which would indicate that Kirk Cousins was the 9th best quarterback in the world last year. Usually, that type of statement draws the ire of people who go, no, look at his quarterback record. And you hear that ad nauseum. And so that's why I prefer this numbers-based approach that says, I don't know how to help you if you don't look at this. If you look at these metrics and say, well, I don't really like PFF, it's factored in as 20% of the equation here. There's 5 of them. We arrive at 9.2 based on an average of all of them. If you think passer rating is archaic, good for you. Then let's pivot and talk about DVOA. What's wrong with that one? Let's talk about the EPA, CPOE, 14th. So I think it's fair to use all 5 of them, and you arrive that based on last year, Cousins was 9th best or 10th best if you want to round it up from 9.2. Now, there's some factors. There's nuance. Imagine that. Last year, Lamar Jackson had a down year. Nobody cared. He flat out wasn't very good. He had one game against the Colts, I think late in the afternoon or prime time. I think it was late in the evening or late in the afternoon where people could see it, where he was phenomenal. He led a fourth quarter comeback for the ages. Boom, MVP Lamar is back. But that was really the only good game all year that he had. Like the only one that was fantastic. He wasn't very good in 2021, but nobody brings it up because it's Lamar Jackson who already has an MVP to his name, so it's, shucks, he'll get him next year. Cousins doesn't get that leverage, never will. But yeah, that's a dirty little secret about the NFL is Lamar Jackson wasn't very good last year. However, in the grand scheme of things, if you're concocting quarterback rankings, as in right here, where does Cousins rank him on the quarterbacks? You're going to take Lamar Jackson over Cousins because he's better, more nimble, more modern, and he would thrive with the Vikings, plain and simple. So I'm not going to be foolish and claim that based on these rankings here that Kirk is better than Lamar. So that would take the 9.2 average and knock it down a notch and say, all right, let's be real here. Then Deshaun Watson didn't play last year because of his own shenanigans. His alleged shenanigans. He'll be back, and so that pushes Cousins down another notch. And then, boom, you're at number 11 based on performance from last year. But there's also, Russell Wilson had a down year last year. And if you would do this same thing for him, where the numbers, if you average them all, he would rank below Cousins. And never met anybody in the world that would rather have Cousins over Wilson. So there's a lot of nuance there, which based on the metrics, it probably ends up putting Cousins at 11th, 12th, or 13th in the pecking order. Sheer numbers of last year, he was 9.2, 9th in the league or 10th in the league. And then those exceptions, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watts, and Russell Wilson, all encountering shit in 2021, like various kinds of shit. They weren't necessarily personally shit. Some of them were. That needs context when you're talking about where Cousins ranks. On the other hand, we like to do this little game of who would you rather have than Cousins. So I'd like you to ask yourself that. I'm sure you've done it before. On the Vikings, plopping some guy of your choice on the roster. How many other dudes would you rather have than Kirk Cousins? Let's say it's week 1 at US Bank Stadium. Kevin O'Connell's the coach. Kwesi's the general manager. Who would you rather have? I think there are 12 other quarterbacks that the world can agree you'd rather have than Cousins, and that puts him at 13th. So it's these 12 guys: Aaron Rodgers, Patrick Mahomes, Tom Brady, Justin Herbert, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, Russell Wilson, Lamar Jackson, Deshaun Watson, and then the big debatable one is Matthew Stafford, because he was, per the metric that some of you like, the win-loss quarterback record, he was trash before he got to the Rams, and then he became untrash and won a Super Bowl because who'd have thunk it? You look around and a football team, 53 guys, mean something in the grand scheme of things? Yeah, they do. When you have Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, Cooper Kupp, Odell Beckham, Von Miller, all on the same team, a Hollywood Squares-like football team, you're probably going to win a Super Bowl. Stafford was just there to make a few key plays and guide the ship. So, Stafford is debatable. I've never watched a single Stafford game in my life where I've been like, oh, God, we left too much time for Stafford. I've never once sat down for a football game involving him where I have that fear brooding in my heart that is inspired by Patrick Mahomes or Russell Wilson or Aaron Rodgers with too much time left on the clock. I think Vikings fans agree. Stafford has so many shortcomings, they're just wiped underneath the rug because he's Matthew Stafford and he has universal sympathy or empathy or praise, whatever it is. It's all poor guy out in Detroit. So he got to Los Angeles, wins the Super Bowl. Everybody is vindicated. So that one is debatable, but that is 12 other quarterbacks that I rattled off that would put Cousins at like 13th. So you have the 9.2, his performance from last year by these metrics, versus 12 other quarterbacks you'd rather have. So living in that 9 through 13th range. So here's the question you have to ask yourself. And this is where the debate always turns, even though it may not be expressly announced. On Kirk Cousins, the debate always goes to money. You can go through all of these metrics right here. You can go through all of the quarterbacks that came from my lips that you'd rather have than him. But money is the decisive factor here. Per average annual salary, he makes the 8th most in the NFL. For 2022 cap hit, he's going to make about the 4th most, or the 4th most cap hit is up against the Vikings ledger. So this is the everlasting crux or dialogue and narrative chats you have with your pals about him. Should the Vikings be overspending to the tune of 8th most per average annual salary or 4th most per cap hit on a quarterback that we know was going to be about the 11th, 12th, or 13th best? That is why every offseason with this man is, let me open up social media. There's Kirk Cousins debate. I don't want to read them. This is why he is a lightning rod for criticism, because the Vikings are overpaying on the quarterback pecking order simply to have a consistent quarterback who throws 30 touchdowns every year. He's not a top 5 dude. Every now and then he starts to hit that rung on the ladder where he is paid in the top 5, but generally speaking, so $35 million per year. That is about the 8th most in the NFL. So you have to decide, is that worth it? Do you think you can break through with Cousins at this price tag, knowing that he's always going to live in this 10th to best or 13th to best category, probably for the rest of days? That's why we talk about this so much. And the other part is it was the bad first impression in 2018. I think this is the money was a big deal when it was signed because it's guaranteed. But in the 2018 season, when the season was on the line against the Packers and the Bears, he crumbled and the team crumbled and they didn't reach the postseason. And he was never forgiven by Vikings fans. It sticks out in their mind. He was the shiny thing, supposed to be better than Keenum, take him to the playoffs, and the only thing that can be fixated on from that first impression is that they did it with Case Keenum, they couldn't do it with Cousins, and therefore he ain't it, and I want a different quarterback. That's how people felt, and that's how they continue to feel. A shitty first impression, a very good defense. That 2018 defense was marvelous. Of course, the offensive line sucked, but when has it not for the Mike Zimmer-led Vikings? So that's what Cousins is up against. A bad first impression, self-induced, and then the money part. Should the 11th best quarterback be paid 8th most or 4th most, depending on what metric you want to use for money? The other, I guess, knock on this is that when the dust settles every season, Cousins is always in the same spot, right about 11th best, right about 12th best. There are stretches of November and October and November, where he is fantastic, elite, looks the part. This is the guy that we signed. Then there's other times, notably, the pandemic season 2020 against the Colts and the Falcons. You're like, ay caramba, this is horrible. This is anemic. And then there's been some times in December where he's just not quite as dynamic as he was in October and November. But it always settles for him right in the same tier, which is about the 10th best, the 11th best, or the 12th best. So that's the knock, is that you want him so badly to be elite all of the time, or most of the time, like Mahomes-esque, and he ain't going to do that. He's simply not that good. But the other part is there's an advantage to knowing that. You know what you're getting. The guy never gets hurt. He's always going to be about the 10th or 11th or 12th best quarterback on the planet. Can Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah find a way to win a Super Bowl with that full knowledge that, for better or for worse, you got about the 11th best dude on the planet? Can you win with it? Those are the stakes. On the other classification, whether it's the metrics that we have talked about here, or 13, 12 quarterbacks you'd rather have, Rodgers, Mahomes, Brady, Herbert, blah, blah, blah. Something always happens to those guys in a season. These metrics are the way that they are because of Wilson not being very good, Lamar Jackson having a down year, Watson almost getting suspended or whatever it was. There's always shit that happens that causes the actual happenings not to play out the way you think they are. But Cousins is usually immune to those because he doesn't miss football games. So the scale of where does he rank on the pecking order is always going to slide, because you could get an alert to your smartphone in a week that Joe Burrow, Torres, blah, 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 he's out for the year. Well, then Cousins is going to climb a rung on the ladder because there's one guy who isn't going to be there. So there's nuance there that the pecking order always slides. Last year, at the end of days, Russell Wilson and Lamar Jackson didn't play as good as Kirk Cousins in 2021. It's blasphemy to say out loud, but it is the truth. Now, down years for both of them. You would want either Lamar or Russell Wilson on the Vikings for 2022, given the choice. You certainly would. But based on how they played, something happened. They weren't quite as good. So that's going to happen again this year with some other guys. It could be Brady, who finally hits a 45-year-old wall. Joe Burrow could have a slump, and his run last year was fabulous, and he's back down to earth, like Baker Mayfield type of thing. Watson might be suspended for 8 games. There's always caveats to these quarterback rankings. So I think all in all, you have to pivot to what you're good at for this team is the hope. We already saw what Zimmer and Spielman and the Kubiaks can effectuate with Cousins. And that was a playoff victory in 2019, just one of them in 4 seasons. So that's why they don't work for the Vikings anymore, is because they could not take this brand of Vikings further. Henceforth, the Vikings hired O'Connell and Kwesi. So right now, with them retaining Cousins, you have to bank your hope that, just as I've talked about Cousins consistently living in the 10th, 11th, 12th best quarterback territory, your hope has to be that this new coaching staff can squeeze some goodness out of him. It can take that 11th best to 6th best, like for the entirety of the year. And I think that's what we're being sold right now, is that we're getting an offensive first head coach who cares about the quarterback, unlike the vibe of the Zimmer regime down the stretch, where they just finally started talking to each other and watching game tape together after 4 years, where you been? Now it'll be more collaborative because they've used that actual word over and over. So you have to say, hey, let's give this thing a whirl, and then maybe the Cousins that we know and some of us love, some of us hate, maybe he really can thrive with a coach who caters to his strengths, that actually runs play-action plays like the Vikings mysteriously wouldn't do in 2021, at least compared to the rest of the world. In conclusion, Cousins has a decision to make on his legacy. Thankfully, he'll be surrounded with new folks, new coaches, a new general manager for these next 2 years. For him, it might even be more if this experiment goes well. But his resume in the lens of NFL annals, the history, it can go 3 different ways. And that's how I'm going to end the show. If he stays as is, maybe gets to the playoffs and next year and they lose to the Bucs in round 1. Let's say that happens. He can do relatively the same stuff he's been already doing, and he will be remembered like Carson Palmer. Carson Palmer did pretty damn good things in regular seasons, only played in 4 playoff games. It's kind of like Dante Culpepper. A little known fact about Dante is he only played in 4 playoff games. Cousins has played in 3. Culpepper is always looked at in such a positive light because he was a part of a really fun era with Randy Moss and such, and a lot of you were in your teens, like I was, getting to know the Vikings. And so Culpepper always has this nice little cushy cloud that he sits on. You can't say Cousins is better than him because I watched Culpepper, damn it, and his eye test a lot better than that. Yeah, Culpepper was a machine. And at the peak of his powers, yes, he was better than Cousins. On the whole of his resume, with the injury, he only got to 4 playoff games. So he's not looked back on, besides Vikings fans, as much. He's just a guy. And so if Cousins does nothing else, status quo, 30 touchdowns for the next 4 seasons, maybe sneaks in a playoff game win, wild carder, he's going to remember like Carson Palmer. The middle category, if he actually gets to the playoffs a couple of times with these Vikings or ventures elsewhere at age 36 and makes some noise, maybe wins a playoff game or 2, he will live in Tony Romo and Drew Bledsoe status. Whether you like Cousins or not, he puts up robust numbers. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. It's akin to, relative to era, what Bledsoe did back in the 90s and early 2000s before Brady took over. Same thing with Romo. Romo was a fabulous quarterback, in my opinion. Never got to a Super Bowl, so he's nestled in this category of not quite good enough to be remembered as a hero. He's decent. Nobody really slanders him. Plus, he's a fabulous play-by-play analyst. But if Cousins makes relative noise without winning a Super Bowl in the next 5 years, he can reasonably be considered a Drew Bledsoe type or a Tony Romo type. Okay. And the final one is the Super Bowl win. If he does that, I don't even know if this one matters because he'll be loved in the Midwest forever, especially in the state of Minnesota. But he'll have Super Bowl tiers too. Some people will just say, oh yeah, he's like Joe Flacco. Had one good year, got him to a Super Bowl. Nothing more after that. Pretty decent quarterback. Seems like a good guy. He'll have that Joe Flacco distinction. Or he could live in that Eli Manning territory. For God's sakes, they both have career 500 records. I don't know too many people that just think Eli was the bee's knees. He wasn't crazy dynamic. He was consistent like Cousins, like you knew what you were getting. With Eli in some big spots, he came through. But Eli was never a drag this team to the playoffs by their socks, like his brother was. And then the one we kind of started the show off with Brees. This one is controversial because Brees is so loved and his numbers are so prolific. At the end of the day, he won 1 Super Bowl. And it's kind of like Rodgers, where you're like, how did that happen? He should have got more than that. What's the deal? Even Brees couldn't drag his team to the playoffs by himself. I've talked on this show a couple times. In 2014, 2015, 2016, Drew Brees and the Saints finished 7-9 3 straight times. Like we said about Lamar Jackson, nobody cared. They just flat out didn't care because Drew Brees is beyond the fray of criticism. Wouldn't you know it? In 2017, they focused on the defense and they got better there and they started getting into the playoffs again. That is the goal for the Vikings. But yeah, Brees was never, ever a dude that did it by himself. Don't let anybody ever tell you different. That's why he only has 1 Super Bowl. They had a great formulation, that team, and they knocked off the Colts. However, there is a case that can be made based on the numbers, based on history, that if Cousins can win a Super Bowl with the Vikings this year or next, then he would live in Brees categories because they are statistically similar. They're both prolific. Again, with Cousins, whether you like it or you don't, the guy throws 30 touchdowns, 4,000 yards per year, and usually about 10 interceptions. That's Brees-ish for the most part. Brees exploded here when the NFL got popping with, you couldn't hit anybody, and we're going to pass the ball 60% of the time. Of course, his numbers spiked. But yes, there is a connection between a theoretical Cousins Super Bowl victory and how he would be looked at in terms of numbers with Drew Brees. And I think there's somebody that tweeted that over the weekend. I read an article about it that, there would be a bedfellow comparison between Brees and Cousins, especially because Cousins right now is only 33 and in theory could play for 6-7 more seasons, and he's going to climb those NFL leaderboards for better or for worse. It'll drive people nuts. So, in summary, I don't know if you can put a specific number on it, but last year he was 9th best. There are 12 other quarterbacks that you'd probably take before him. So I'll land where I always do. And I'm glad I've stated this out loud on videotape. Kirk Cousins is about the 11th or 12th best quarterback in the NFL. It's very rare that he would be better than that when a season's over, especially with Mike Zimmer in charge. It's almost unheard of that he would be below that significantly because the guy never misses time at all, and he always ends up with almost the same statistical metric, which is bizarre. Like, he doesn't have shitty seasons. He also doesn't have elite seasons. He's on the upper tier, 12th, 11th, 10th, wherever you want to, based on injuries accordingly to other quarterbacks. So that is my speech. I would say Cousins, where he ranks among all NFL quarterbacks, is about the 11th or 12th best. All I got for Monday. We'll be back Tuesday and Skol, baby.